Welcome to The Middle of Culture, episode 11. My name is Braeden.
And I am Peter.
And this is our podcast where we talk about culture and stuff. I mean, I guess that's what we do.
And whatever we kind of feel like talking about, you know, entertainment of some type and whatever we want to talk about. That was kind of one of the fun things about this was we started it with the idea of if we want to talk about it, we can.
So when we bring in The Birth of Biopolitics by Michel Foucault, everyone will know. No, I'm just kidding. I won't make you read Foucault. Besides, we wouldn't read Birth of Biopolitics anyway. We would read Discipline and Punish, because if you're going to read you want a primer on Michel Foucault, you read Discipline and Punish. But we won't read that either, I promise, readers or listeners.
I was going to say, I'm thinking that sounds like maybe not what I'm looking for.
I mean, I guess if you don't want to learn about biopolitics, necropolitics, the concept of the panopticon, all that sort of fun stuff.
I mean, Panopticon is a pretty cool one-man-ish black metal band from the kind of, I think he's from Kentucky, so I'm down with that Panopticon, but I don't think that that's what you're talking about.
It was a middling Isis album.
I'm trying to remember.
It wasn't Isis's best.
No, it definitely wasn't.
But also it's the concept of self-surveillance, because you never know when you're being watched, which is what we do in American culture and in Western culture altogether.
That is, in some ways, that is kind of true.
But anyway, we're not here to talk about Michel Foucault, but we are here to talk about a book.
But before we talk about that book, I have to ask,
by all means,
because we've talked about this before, have you watched the full Thor Love and Thunder trailer?
Of course I did.
And what did you think?
Gore looks boring, but most Marvel villains are. And other than that, it looks like fun.
All I could think as I was watching it is, I want this movie and I want it now. I am very, very excited. You know, after we talked and did our draft and Ragnarok ended up winning, I've been thinking about that movie more, and everything I see from its follow-up makes me go, oh, this is the movie I want to see. Multiverse of Madness was fun. I enjoyed it. I think I'm liking it more, again, the more I think about it. But, Thor Love and Thunder is, that's what I think I need in my life fairly soon.
I think Natalie Portman's guns are great, and I just want her to be best friends with, I want Jane to be best friends with Valkyrie. That's all I need. I need the buddy comedy with the two of them, and that's all I need.
Oh, I agree. That is the team up that we're all dreaming of, I think.
I mean, that's the sapphic dream right there.
Well,
and there's our segue.
Sapphic dreams.
I was going to say, that's our segue. Speaking of sapphics, let's talk about some novellas that we've read for this episode. Well, I only reread the one, but I think you reread 3 of them.
I did.
But
I read the first 3.
Today we are going to focus specifically on a book by Thai author Benjanun Sriduangkaew, which is called Shall Machines Divide the Earth, which is the 3rd novella in the Machine Mandate series. And so we're going to be talking a bit about this. There'll be lots of spoilers probably at the end. But before we get to spoilers and talking about the plot and everything, first impressions. I brought you this book, Peter, because I am a really big fan of this author. I think she's really incredible. I get very excited when she puts out something new. And I wanted to introduce you to something you had not heard of before. So you read Shall Machines Surrender, Now Will Machines Hollow the Earth, and Shall Machines Divide the Earth, or Hollow the Beast and Divide the Earth. They've got great, if long, titles. What did you think about these books that you read?
So to start off, she's an interesting author. And I was not aware of, I guess, the controversy surrounding her in the past. And so I thought that was a little interesting to kind of see what some of what the past was with her and some of the things that she said. And then all of a sudden, what I was reading, there was almost like a disconnect there, and it was interesting.
I agree.
But we'll leave that all aside now. I just thought that was interesting. I was like, okay, this is not what I was expecting when I'm reading about what some of her previous critiques in the past had been. So I will say, I did, as you mentioned, I read the first 3 novellas because, number one, because I'm kind of a completionist in that way. And number two, even though, you told me you don't need to, you'll be fine to jump in on this one. And I agree, I would have been fine to jump in on it. I don't think there's any question that the experience was made better by having read the previous 2, because
For sure.
I had a difficult time really coming to a conclusion of how did I feel about these. I think that, on Goodreads, when I finished them, because I was reading them either on my Kindle or in the Kindle app, and obviously Amazon owns Goodreads, so it pops that up when you first start it. And when you get to the end, it's like, hey, do you want to give it stars? And I'll generally try and give something a real quick, I don't leave a review, but I try and just, okay, how many stars am I thinking? And then sometimes I go back and I'll change that up a little bit, but it's just sort of right now as I'm hitting the last page of this book, what does my gut say? And sure. I gave the first 2 3 stars and I gave this one 4 stars, but I honestly think that's only because I have to do full stars and I was feeling generous. If I was really pressed, I think I would have given the first 2 books 2.5 stars and this one 3.5 stars. But this one definitely, for me, was a step up from the first 2 novellas. There were some things I really liked about it, and there were some issues that I had with it, and I think that it's more with her style of writing because these were issues that were present in all of the previous, in the previous 2 that I read. So there was kind of a common thread. My biggest criticisms were present in all 3 novellas. So,
okay, well, I'm very curious to get to those. But before we get to those critiques and also talking a little bit more about how we felt about it, I want to set the stage a little bit. So the Machine Mandate universe is a future, tens of thousands of years future, setting based on our, planet having colonized the galaxy, having moved onward, and at one point the AIs having risen up and revolted against humanity. And so the AIs basically convene to create their own government and their own governing body called the Mandate. And it's interesting, especially having read all 3 of them, to see the ways in which the AIs are, they're not good usually. There are exceptions, but in a lot of ways, many of these AIs are just as complicated and troubled and layered as the human characters are. And they're not just 100% evil or 100% good. They are, for all intents and purposes, they're fully realized characters with divided and complex motivations. But they're also hyper powerful.
And not all, and not all in concert with each other. There's
Indeed
division
not.
amongst the AIs because they are individuals, because they can have their own thoughts and beliefs and feelings, for, in lack of a better word. And I appreciated that. I thought that was, we think about the AIs revolting against humanity, and in most science fiction, that just means that they're immediately trying to destroy us, a la Terminator, as kind of the first example that comes to mind, right?
Sure.
And has become a cultural enough thing that, people still make jokes about Skynet and things like that. And I really appreciated that that's not at all how the AI was portrayed. Now, there's no question that there are little comments and sort of subtext here and there that, the humans are worried about this possibly happening. And they recognize that if the AIs chose to just say, we're going to wipe you all out, I mean, they're powerful and the humans could be in big trouble here. But that's not the reality. That's a possibility in the future that everybody's still a little worried about. But I enjoyed that was not, okay, the AIs revolt and boom, here we go. We're going to kill you or subjugate you all.
Sure. And there is conflict between human and AI, but it is not at that galactic scale. It is not at that existential scale. It is very personal, and motivated by personal things, both on the parts of the humans and the AIs. Yeah. But so that's kind of the situation. The AI capital is Shenzhen Sphere, which is where book 1 takes place. And then there are, hundreds of planets where humanity lives, largely without any sort of AI, or if they do have AI, they are members of the Mandate who have deigned to come and work with humans rather than work in a servitude relationship, which is what they had been in before the uprising. But then in book 3, we're specifically looking at a woman named Thanarat who goes to a planet where there is basically a deathmatch game that happens where AIs and humans are teamed up and have this, battle to the death to see death of the human, destruction of the proxy, the physical body of the AI, and whoever wins gets their heart's desire. And so that is kind of where this book opens.
Very sort of Hunger's Game / Battle Royale kind of of setup, but with that difference being, again, a human has to have an AI teammate.
Yes. But so that's kind of the setting we find ourselves in at the start of this book. Thanarat arrives at this planet Septet, attempts to join the Divide, as this event is called, the Great Divide, and the something of Divide. I can't remember what it's called.
Now I'm blanking on it too. It's just most of the time it's referred to as the Divide.
And so that is this fight, and she goes to find an AI companion. She does, and then she competes essentially against these other humans and AIs who are their opponents in this battle. So you said that you would give these 2.5, 3.5 stars out of 5. And what are some of your problems? You said that you had similar problems with all 3 of them. What sort of critique do you have on these books?
Sure. So the first thing for me, and this gets back to what we have discussed when we've discussed previous fiction of any sort, character for me reigns supreme. And these are short, and we don't have a lot of space to develop either the world or the character. Like, it's limited. And so it really, really bugged me that we were wasting some of these precious pages with what, and maybe this is just me revealing who I am, but I thought terribly unnecessarily in-depth sexual escapades between characters. I don't care about sex in literature, whatever, in media. Okay, fine. But it bothered me so much because I'm like, I'm spending in 100 pages, I'm spending maybe even 10 pages, a tenth of this book, wading through these descriptions of in humans and other humans, but they're all kind of part humans and part robots because they've all are prosthetics or enhanced to some point. Or in some cases, humans and AIs having these sexual encounters, which again, didn't feel like, to the degree they were being described, they added anything to the story or the characters. And I wanted, give me more of this world building. There were scenes in particular in this book where I'm like, okay, you've given me enough of this character that this character we should have even just another paragraph with the character addressing this particular issue. And it wasn't there. And it felt to me that I'm like, and it bothered me because I'm like, some of that stuff that you were spending time doing earlier and describing, I could have had here in a more meaningful story and character related point. So that was my number 1.
Okay. I would just say, I disagree. I think that the sex scenes were as important as any of the conversations or scenes of violence in building and rounding out and and giving a viewpoint into who these characters are. I understand why you maybe didn't feel that way, but I find and this is a thing that I feel about Benjanun's writings altogether, and I will admit a lot of her work has a fair amount of sex in it, but I find each one of those sex scenes is as important to the plot as any of the conversations that happen, and that the book would be weaker without them. Because each of them show us a facet of who that character is, and shows us more of who they are, why they are the way they are, and what they want. But I also understand why you maybe didn't feel that way.
Well, and perhaps that's actually more to the point, and that is that then she's creating characters that I don't like and I don't care for, and I don't think that their motivations make sense for what should be otherwise responsible adult characters. Now, look, maybe this is me exposing my age and where I'm at in some sad stage in life, but all of these characters are, to my opinion, so ridiculously overwhelmed and managed to the point that they're like slaves to their genitalia, that I'm like, okay, think about something else other than your crotch. And so, yes, I can see where these scenes played into developing these characters, but maybe that was the issue, is I didn't like the characters they were developing because I'm like, you know what? I'm sorry. You should be able to think with your brain instead of your crotch. And that was where I came away from it going, I guess I don't really like these characters that much, because I expect characters who have more autonomy than, them being governed by their hormones. And I didn't feel like, and this is, again, like I say, every single book, you go back to the first one and the second one, like so many decisions that these characters were making were supposed to be based on relationships, because realistically, all three of these novellas, they are really relationship stories more than anything else. And they're relationship stories told in this science fiction setting, this far future setting. And that's cool. Again, like I say, characters king for me. So I don't care what setting you put it in. Give me interesting characters. Give me characters that I feel like I can root for, that I can like, that I can want to see them succeed in whatever they're going to do, and that I can feel some pathos for them when they experience the failures that they need to experience. Otherwise, it's going to be a boring piece of entertainment to enjoy, or, to partake of. But I look at it and I'm like, man, like, I don't know. When I run into people who are as governed by their groin as you folks are, I tell them they need to get psychiatric counseling and help. I really do. And maybe that's just a facet of the job I'm in, where I get people who come to me with issues and I'm like, hey, guess what? You need to think about things more than with your junk. And, if you need some help, that's the only way you're going to get over this. And I felt like all of these characters were just swimming in a morass of their libidinous hormones that just were driving them to perhaps make decisions that didn't seem rational and seemed wholly and completely, I wouldn't even say emotional, again, just sort of hormonally driven, with eventually some rational ties or emotional ties that started to develop, but just so overwhelmingly just characters acting based on their groin that I was like, okay, I cannot empathize with these characters. And perhaps that was what made it a little off-putting for me.
So what you're telling me is that you come from a background of reading books that are not romance genre.
There's no question. I don't read a lot of romance.
Because these are extremely tame and extremely level-headed people if you're coming from the background of the romance genre.
and that would also explain why I have not chosen to partake in the romance genre.
Because, yeah, I do agree with you that, the sex is an integral part of these books and an integral part of understanding who these characters are. But it also, like I said, for me, gives me such a viewpoint into who they are. And I end up really coming to like a lot of these characters. Like specifically Thanarat. Thanarat is by far my favorite, I think, of Benjanun's protagonists. I really think Thanarat.
She's definitely my favorite out of the 3 books that I did, the 3 novellas that I read. Yeah, which is why I think it's got a full point higher than the others.
Fair. I've read the 4th book that came out after this one, which actually is about Rekadat, and what happens to her after this. It doesn't sound like you're maybe going to read it, but it's really good too.
I think I will. I don't want to come off sounding too harsh that I found these difficult to get through. It wasn't that I was, it didn't feel like a slog. For me, I got into those sex scenes and I thought, okay, whatever. I don't find this, for me, again, it didn't flesh out the characters in as meaningful a way as I would have liked. And so I mostly felt like I was being robbed just a little bit of ways in which I was like, I would like to know this character more, but this didn't tell me enough more to warrant the sacrifice in the limited pages that we had. And so I actually think I will read the next one. I mean, I bought the 5 that are out on Kindle because they were cheap. And
okay.
Again, I'm a completionist. Nice. So I have them, and I fully expect to read them at some point. I just don't think, it's not like I finished this one. I was like, oh, great. Let's get into number 4. I got to the end of this one. I was like, I'm really looking forward to talking about this. And then I'm looking forward to reading something else. And I'll probably come back to this down the road.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the way in which these books are written, and this is true of all of the parts of them, the way that food is described, the way that violence is described, and the way that sex is described, they're so physical and embodied. And I feel like I, as the reader, can sense and taste and smell what's happening in each scene. And yes, that extends to the sex scenes. So I can understand how that could make one feel uncomfortable or make one be like, we're dwelling on this. But I don't know. I feel like they mean a lot. And there's a scene in this book specifically. We'll talk about the drama. What's the word for that? The plot, the what happens in this book. I couldn't think of it's a trama. I speak Spanish. Most of my literature analysis has been done in Spanish, friends on the podcast. So that's the word in my brain. I think it's plot.
Yes. Plot is a word that we use in English that would fit in this situation.
We'll talk about the plot. But there is a scene specifically where they're laying in bed and Daji asks Thanarat to tell her a story that was so intimate and was so lush that it felt like that's the sort of thing that me and my wife do when we're laying in bed. We ask each other to tell each other stories, even still after we've been, our 11-year anniversary was a few weeks ago. But we still do that when we lay in bed with each other. And there's like this intimacy and this closeness and this rush of emotion and fluidity, which I feel like is so often, at least, missing for me when I read other sci-fi authors, because they so often feel, or fantasy authors, they often feel really antiseptic or sanitary when it comes to the relationships between people, while they glory and focus on the big action set pieces, which are fine and dandy. That's cool if that's what you want to focus on. But I enjoy that I feel the like I said, the lushness and the intimacy of these scenes in these books, and specifically in this one between Thanarat and Daji, that I just think are really cool. And then it transfers into the action scenes as well. So let's talk a little bit about the plot, and then in the spoiler section I can talk about how the sex and the violence are inextricably linked in this book.
Okay, let's do it.
So like I said, Thanarat is a soldier. She's from this planet Iothia, which has been taken over by
You know what? I'm just going to say, let's just go ahead and let's say spoilers here on out, because
let's go.
Then we don't have to dance around stuff. So spoilers.
Yeah, if you haven't,
you've been warned.
If you haven't read these books, go read them. They're really cool. Warning, lots of lesbian sex in them. But they rule. And I think it's hot. So go for it. So Thanarat, war veteran, she's leaving her planet of Iothia, where which has been taken over by this other planet, the Hellenes, which is this warring faction. But she specifically goes to Septet because she wants to try to get her ex-wife back. Her ex-wife, they divorced 8-9 years ago, and then her ex-wife left to join the Haruspex program, which is a thing that is discussed in considerable detail in the first book in the series. But basically what the Haruspex program does is they take a new AI and they basically incubate it inside of a person, so they share a body, share emotions, share feelings to help that AI become a fully realized program. And then eventually the AI will, move on and have its own life. The person who hosted the AI then becomes, a fully citizen of the Shenzhen sphere of the mandate. And so it seems like it would be a win-win for everyone. And so Thanarat's ex-wife, Eurydice, decides she wants to do this. She goes, and something happens in the Haruspex process, and she dies. And so that's where Thanarat is when we first see her. She's lost her planet, and she's lost her ex-wife. And so she goes to Septet to want to win so that she can try to bring her wife back from the dead, because surely the machines could do that.
Now,
she's
tell
been sent
me something.
there.
Did we know that at the beginning? Because I felt like we didn't know why she was there at the beginning. Like, it took some time for that to really
sets it up fairly
realized.
early. It sets it up fairly early, but yes, it's not super clear at the beginning. It's not until after her first conversation with Rekadat, who makes it very clear that she is there specifically for the liberation of Iothia, their home planet. When Rekadat realizes, oh no, she's not here for the planet, she's here for Eurydice.
Yeah.
But so Thanarat goes. She's come, even though the tournament has started, at the behest of one Benzaiten in Autumn, who is one of the main characters of And Shall Machines Surrender, the first book, and who is kind of a shitheel. I'm very curious. I'm very curious to see what happens with Benzaiten in the last 2 books. I have not read book 5, which is out in digital. I was waiting for the paperback copies because I have the other 4 in paperback. Apparently books 5 and 6 might not get a physical release, so I might just buy them on Kindle. But apparently books 5 and 6 deal with Benzaiten a little bit, and you get to see kind of why Z is such a shitheel. But so at Benzaiten's advice, Thanarat goes, enters as an aspirant into this tournament, but then needs to be.
And I think it's important to note. I was going to say, I think it's important to note here that Benzaiten is, even amongst the AI, this AI has a certain mystique around their persona that even the AI don't really understand. And so
Z is really an enigma.
And there's some power associated with the character, and there's, because of this place where they stand, where they're kind of outside the mandate, but anyway, they're in a unique, the character Z's in a unique place of power amongst the AI.
Yeah, and as we learned in the first book, Z has decided as an adult grown AI to join into a Haruspex situation, which also makes them makes her extremely unique. And for those of you who are wondering, Benzaiten in Autumn uses the neopronouns Z, Zim, Zer. So that's why we have been using those neopronouns as well.
And you have been using much better than me. I try, but that was one of those things. I was like, okay, I get what it's doing and I can see it, and my brain automatically is cool with it on the page. But then when I try and say it, my brain's like, wait, what a second. So
the thing about neopronouns, that's okay. The thing about neopronouns is that you're going to make mistakes if someone comes to you and uses neopronouns. So all you can do is be like, sorry, and then move on. Don't make a big deal about it, and just try your best. There's, Ohuo also uses neopronouns and uses a different set of pronouns in this book. So we've got two different sets of neopronouns. We've got some, fully, non-binary people who are using they, them as pronouns. We've got a whole lot of women, and, Chunhyang's glaive even uses its as its pronouns because it is so weirdly detached from the human experience. So lots of lots of cool play with pronouns. And I guess this is as good a time as any. I am a non-binary person. I use they, them pronouns. So I really like seeing people who are non-binary in fiction. And I really appreciate that Benjanun shows a panoply of ways that non-binariness or rejecting heteronormativity can appear in her books. I think that is really cool. And it's a thing that I do not see very often in the other media I consume. So, props for that. Also, I don't know if you listen to the podcast, Mom and Dad. If you do, I guess you can call and talk with me about it. That's why I was talking a lot about trans stuff and non-binary identities last time I visited. But here we are. No better time to come out than on a podcast. But right? Here we are.
I mean, well, it's because I'd like to think that this is a safe place where we can have those conversations.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. I trust you, and I know that you're going to be cool about it. So I appreciate that. So anyway, Benzaiten sends Thanarat. Thanarat enters as an aspirant because she has not been chosen to have an AI partner yet, which the AI partners are referred to as regalia, which is the coolest name for an AI partner you could possibly have. At least as far as I'm concerned. I love using that word, and it becomes so literal later in the book, and I really like that that function of it as well. So eventually she is teamed up with a regalia who goes by the name of Empress Daji something. I don't remember. It's a long name. She goes by Daji for short. All of the AIs have really complicated names, and I kind of love them. But they all do have weird names, and then they're often shortened. So Daji is her shortened name. But she is an AI that is just described so lushly. Her body is covered in these flowers that move, and she has this little fox that goes around with her that can transform. That's essentially like a second body that she can pilot. Daji's really cool. I really think she's one of my favorite AIs in this series. But so Thanarat and Daji team up. They fight a bunch of people. They have a bunch of sex. Eventually you find out that Daji was actually... Eurydice was Daji's hair specs. Mm-hmm. And so Daji thought that she hated Thanarat because of that. And the rancor that had been there because they had divorced.
Yeah. And interestingly, before we get to that point, I do want to focus in on that scene where this realization occurs, because I thought it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, wait, what's going on here? And then when I realized it, I thought, well, that was well done. I liked that. And if I'm going to get names wrong, because again, I was pretty sick over the last week. And so I kind of had to just slam this thing in to get it done in time for today. So, fair.
And it was my second time reading it. So
if I'm remembering, the time they realize this, Thanarat is not with Daji physically, but they have this connection, and I can't remember if Thanarat had the fox with her or not, and maybe, and so that's kind of where the connection is, because the fox is again, it's both a second body, but also an extension of Daji. And she was in a place where she was meeting, oh gosh, it starts with an E and it's got some N's and an S's, and I can't remember her name, but one of the main combatants, the human combatants, or so we believe. And this character comes walking in to this area, and Thanarat sees her and immediately has this violent reaction. And it's not even so much her, but it's also coming from her connection with Daji. Because this other combatant comes in with what looks like Eurydice but is completely, got a collar around, like a leash around, a collar around the neck attached to a leash, and is just sort of docilely coming in with this other combatant. And that was, again, I liked the way that reveal occurred, because there are a lot of different ways that Benjanun could have addressed that. And I actually thought this was one of the coolest ways she could have opened up this conversation that leads to Daji and Thanarat to having this realization, and Thanarat beginning to understand, who Daji and why Daji selected her as her regalia. And then, a good conversation and an interesting interaction between the two of them as Daji kind of is processing all these different things that she has felt towards Thanarat because of her connection to Eurydice up until the time Eurydice died.
Yes. And that conversation, like you said, it starts through their neural link because, they have that neural link because they're partners, they're a duelist and a regalia. And then they meet together and they have that really well thought out conversation, really where they really hash out why Daji has all these feelings for Thanarat and why she has so quickly thrown herself at Thanarat, because so much of her is that memory that Eurydice had and that she has built some of her personality off of. And then there's a big sex scene, a real big sex scene. The sexiest one in the book.
And to me, the least unnecessary.
Oh, 100%. But is also the most symbolic, because that is when they realize who they are to each other and who they want to be to each other. And they both give and receive.
Yeah.
And that is so symbolic to me. And works so well in establishing that relationship between the two characters, which is why I am thrilled that book 6 is about them again.
Oh, I did not know that.
It's not out yet, but it's the one I'm the most excited for. Book 5 is about Anushka again, and book 6 is about Thanarat and Daji again. So let's go. I'm ready. Also, first person. I like the first person writing. That's also one of the things I really like about this one compared to the others. The other two are written in third person.
I did enjoy that when it was happening from Thanarat's viewpoint. I liked getting that the first person viewpoint as opposed to the little bits here and there where it was more Rakadat's viewpoint, and then it was in the third person.
Sure. But so they realize who they are to each other. They fall in love. It's tumultuous. It's tempestuous. They're in love. They got to win then. If they want to make it out of this alive, they got to win. And because you can't come in second, the person who comes in second gets lobotomized and put into a museum. So they either need to drop out or they got to win. And Thanarat's not going to not win. So they team up with one of the other duelists. They find out that Rekadat, Rekadat was Thanarat's old partner when Thanarat was a detective back on Ayutthaya, and they had both felt for each other and had been really attracted to each other, but neither realized that the other one was. And, Thanarat, as a monogamist, she was married. Even if things were kind of rocky at that point, she wasn't going to cheat. And Rekadat didn't ever realize that Thanarat was also attracted to her. So it was this pining between that each of them felt towards each other that was never realized. But then Rekadat is also here and claims that she no longer has a regalia, that it had been taken out, which is true. She had a different regalia, but she is actually teamed up with Chunhyung's glaive, who is that extremely violent, extremely mean one, and Ensign, who was supposedly her duelist, was actually just fake. It was just a proxy that Chunhyung was using. And so Rekadat was actually the duelist that Thanarat was going to have to defeat to beat the book. Big things happen. They use some weird codes that they get to build fortresses that fight against each other. It's cool. The writing's really evocative. Thanarat uses her nanomachines to make wolves. Rekadat uses hers to make tigers. The tigers and the wolves fight. It's great because that's what they used to think of each other as when they were partners. It's very evocative. It's very lyrical. But eventually Thanarat wins. And instead of resurrecting Eurydice, because why would she resurrect Eurydice when she's now in love with Daji and realizes that it is better that, Eurydice has passed on. That's okay. She uses her winnings to save Rekadat's life so that Rekadat is not lobotomized and put into the museum. And that's where the book ends. It ends with Daji and Thanarat saying, we're going to go back to Ayutthaya, and I guess we're going to do this ourselves instead of having the mandate back us up on this.
Yeah.
So what specifics do you kind of want to talk about the book? We kind of have gotten into a bunch of things, but is there anything else specifically that you want to bring up?
Well, again, I don't want to sound like I'm down on this because when I rate things, I try very hard to not overrate. So,
I'm the same way.
We used to talk about in video games, they would talk about the 7 to 9 scale, where on a grading from 1 to 10, anything that was less than a 7 was garbage, and that's stupid. It's just like, I think it's dumb that we've got, in grades in school, you get grades that are passing grades, but they're actually failing grades, and just anyway. So for me, a 3.5 star means it was a good book that I enjoyed. And a 2.5 star means that it was kind of right in the middle. It's not like a 50% means failing for me. It means like, yeah, it was about 50% good and 50% meh. It's not until for me you get down to like a 2 or a 1.5 or 1 star where I'm like, okay, this was something that was bad. So I say that because I gave it 4 stars, really kind of more of a 3.5 to 4 stars. So the language is sometimes really good and sometimes really not for me. It was inconsistent. And that was one of the things that occasionally pulled me out of the book. Is there were times where I felt like it almost felt like it was try-hard language, where it was like, okay, I'm going to break out some words that if you actually look them up, they are classified as archaic because we don't use them anymore, and we don't use them for decent reasons. And so in some of those situations, again, the language kind of pulled me out of the book a little bit. And then there were other times where it was very descriptive. And so it was a little uneven and inconsistent. And that was another reason why I think all 3 of these, if the writing was more consistent, would have gotten a full half star higher. Because again, there were really strong moments. And then there were moments where it was trying too hard to be, I don't know if it was trying too hard to be flowery or if it was trying too hard to just come across as, look, I know cool words that you don't know. And then there were other times where I'm like, well, this doesn't feel like this is quite on the same level as the rest of the language in this novella. So that was how I read them. And at times it really worked in the novella's favor, and in other times her writing style worked against the novella for me. And so, I don't have any specifics off the top of my head. I mean, there were a couple words here and there that I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know what that word means, but I don't know exactly. And then I'd look it up, and every single time I did that, it specifically would say archaic. It was like, this is a word that is not used anymore. It's like, well, they're good. I don't feel bad about the fact that I didn't know that word off the top of my head. But anyway.
It's funny. I admit that never happened to me. I never had a thing I had to look up, but now I'm curious which ones you did.
Well, like I said, there was a couple, and I'm like, I understand exactly what you're saying with this word here. I've just never heard this word, or can't remember having heard this word before. And so then I would go to look it up to make sure that, yes, I was interpreting it correct. I was giving it the right meaning, and I was. But every single time it was like, yeah, no, this is not a word that is used in modern language anymore, which is fine. But it was the fact that was sometimes there and sometimes not there. That was the inconsistency of it that pulled me out of the book at times. I don't know what other big things really I would kind of point out that I haven't already. Again, I can understand what you're saying, and I can see that, yeah, the scenes of intimacy between characters tell us about them And there were certain ones, and again, like the one we just most recently brought up, after Thanarat and Dodgy, well, Dodgy knew who she was after she kind of tells Thanarat, and they have this realization. That sex scene I actually did think was necessary and was appropriate, and I thought that it helped in that situation. So again, that's what I'm saying. It's not like across the board I'm just like, oh no, that's bad. It was just sometimes it worked for me and sometimes it didn't. And that was a scene where I actually thought that it did, and that it did add to the characters and add to the story in a way that felt meaningful to me. And
sure,
there were some cool things with the battles between, especially the AI proxies. I would have liked a little bit more, perhaps, clear description of what was going on in those. There were some things where it was like, I understand the words you're using, but my brain, maybe it's just because I'm slow and stupid and old. I'm having a hard time getting the picture of what's happening. Like, I understand all the words I'm reading, but they're not giving me a clear picture of what is actually happening here. And so, again, they were very interesting. So I have absolutely zero regrets of having read them. And as I said, I fully intend to actually read some more at some point. And now that you tell me that book 6 is about Thanarat and Dodgy, that does excite me, because there's no question they're my favorite characters of all the characters we have met thus far in the 3 books that I have read. So I don't know. Like, again, it was interesting because it was a little different than a lot of what I usually read. And again, I appreciate that. It's easy with my limited time trying to split between so many different things and work and kids and home and, all this stuff. It's easy for me just to slip back into what I'm comfortable with and what I know. And I appreciated that this didn't fit into that it wasn't too far out that I was like, what's going on here? But it was, again, it was different in a lot of ways that I don't know if I'd say it challenged me, but it was outside of my comfort zone enough that I am glad that I did have to step outside my comfort zone a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you had a good time. Like I said, I'm a really big fan of Benjanun. I've read all of her books that are available in physical version so far, including her. She has a series that is a collaboration with another writer, Devi Lacroix, where they write under the pen name Maria Ying. And those are kind of like urban fiction, like kind of like spy stuff. They're way hornier, so I would not recommend those ones for you. They're quite horny.
I mean, again, maybe people are just way more horny than I am. And again, maybe I'm admitting something about myself that I'm just like, oh my gosh, like frickin' keep your pants on and use your brain for once, you butt munch. But whatever.
Nah, that's no fun. That's no fun. One thing I did want to mention that I said I was going to bring up, the symbolism of the fox changing into gloves is so good and so hot. And then when in that final battle, when Thanarat engages Bulwark, or one of the things that she has,
it was Bulwark.
And then those gloves become body armor over her entire body. Like, turning yourself into the armor that your lover wears is like the sexiest thing on the planet, in my humble opinion. I am loath to think of a more sexy thing that you could possibly do if you were a super powerful AI than become the armor that your lover dons to wear into battle.
Yes, I would have. I thought of it as well, that is extremely intimate. So intimate was more the word that my brain went to. But yeah, sexy works as well.
I mean, it's hot. And I think that one thing that's really interesting to me, and we can kind of be wrapping this up. I think this will be a shorter episode. As I was rereading this the other day, I was listening to Terry Riley's The Harp of New Albion. Are you familiar with that album at all?
No, I am not.
Terry Riley is like a postmodernist classical music composer. And The Harp of New Albion is an album he recorded in the early 80s, where he retuned his piano and then wrote like a 2-hour improvisational piece on it. So it's really cool. It's really great piano music, but it is the kind of thing that as you're listening to it, you're like, especially as a pianist myself, I'm like, I would love to learn how to play this. Oh, I would have to retune my piano to what? That's not going to happen. But I was listening to that, and then I read this line near the end of the book where she says, with the machine, every stanza must be written anew, the entire rhythm and meter rearranged, talking about Thanarat's relationship with Daji. And reading that while listening to this piece of music where it has been completely like like we took the piano apart and re-put it back together in a way that pianos have never sounded before, was really, I don't know, it was just like kismet to be listening to that when I read that line. And there were a few other lines like that that just really stuck out to me, because like you said, there are some occasional archaic vocab choices, but sometimes Benjanun just has a way with a phrase that I'm just like, yeah, man. Yeah. There's another one that I'm looking at. I live tweeted my rereading of this book. And there was another one from early on where Thanarat is talking about how much of her is cyborged. Because a whole bunch of Thanarat is not human flesh anymore. She's lost both of her legs and one of her arms. And that's another thing that I really like in a lot of sci-fi, but I think is worth mentioning here. The way that disability and disability aids are a natural part of life, and that like it's cool that that so many people are disabled and have these aids, and no one comments on it. It's just, we're all just life. It's not dwelt upon. It's remarked on as natural and normal, and I really appreciate that. Because so many times, people treat people who are disabled or who have disability aids poorly, and you're like, you're wearing glasses. That's the same damn thing. Like, just because glasses have hundreds of years of history of being a cyborg disability aid doesn't mean that it's not a cyborg disability aid, baby. Like, your contacts are your contacts are like the most cyborg-ass cyborg thing you could possibly have. Like, you put small plastic films in your eyeballs every day and it makes you see straight? What? That's some cyborg stuff. I love it.
I'm super glad that we have them.
I don't wear contacts. I'm a glasses kid, but here we are. But she says in there, to be broken down is an opportunity to be reborn. To be erased is an opportunity to reinvent yourself. And I thought that line ruled.
Yeah, that's a great line.
Anyway, I think that is a great line to kind of wrap up on. I think these books are great. Again, reader beware. You're in for a lesbian scare, because all of the characters in this book are... there's one male character I can think of. There's two male characters in the entire book. One's an old guy who she gets information from, and one's an AI. And other than that, they're all women and non-binary characters. And that is true of all of Benjanun's books. She, being a lesbian herself, writes the books that she wants to read, which I gotta respect. There's not a lot of people who are writing books. There's not a whole lot of lesbian science fiction out there, so I'm excited to hear when there is some.
Sure.
But if you want to read them, they're really great. I really like them. But yeah, I think that's where we'll end this episode. Thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, you can shoot us an email at
feedback@themiddleofculture.com.
Perfect. And if you want to go leave us a review or 5 stars, that would be great. That would make my little heart just grow 3 sizes like I'm the Grinch. But
it would be wonderful. We would love it.
Yeah, it'll make it. I'll bust the little thing that you hold over my chest that shows how big my heart is if you leave a review.
Oh, I want to see that. So somebody needs to leave us a review.
I mean, I want to see it too. But thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely, and thanks again for this recommendation. As I said, I definitely don't want to come across as too down on them. I thought that they were interesting and really fascinating is a good word I think I would use. I had some issues with it, but I'm glad I read them, and I will be reading the rest. I don't know for sure when, but I definitely will.
ACAB, but we'll make an exception for Thanarak because she quit.
Sounds good.
All right. We'll see you later.